decks here in the Energy series and maybe in Modern in general. We have George Jabbour supporting his classic Azorius control take, Narset Days of Doing, of course, going to make their appearance in the deck list in that context. And then Joseph Bernal playing arguably one of the best decks in the format. Rakdos Scam does like his fair decks as well. Does Joseph Bernal, as he's going to start off with just a Bloodstained Mire.
Really excited to cover this match here in Indianapolis. If you live in the Midwest, it's a great time to join the Energy Series and play some sick Modern action. These two decks are, kind of mainstays of the format. They're not doing anything too crazy. One's casting blue and white spells to make the game go long. The other one's casting black and red spells to make the game go short and get maybe two griefs on turn one. We might be seeing that right here. We've got a grief from Bernal.
Looks like a grief pitching a grief. Do we have the scam? That is the question. You don't have to obviously make that decision now because there are two triggers generated by grief when it is evoked. We have the sacrifice trigger and the ETB trigger. So you can wait until ETB trigger resolves to decide whether or not you want to cast your scam spell, if so. And that actually is what's going to pull out the Solitude, it looks like here, in response, because George Jabbour does not want to get scammed. Is not interested in that. And so Solitude, I believe,
Joseph Bernal has played a lot of Magic, and I assume he ordered those triggers correctly, where it's the discard will resolve first. So it looks like it does look like Joseph Bernal lets the exile happen. But we're looking at a hand of a lot of unique Magic cards. I think that's a preordained there that he's nabbing.
Yeah, that looks correct. And I believe that Supreme Verdict was the pitch. And we have another one in hand with just Breeding Pool, Plain, Scalding Tarn, the leftovers. George Jabbour, clearly a fan of all the fancy stuff. We do see Kahira in the companion zone, so that is going to be a fixture of this deck. Tells you a little bit about what George Jabbour's composition looks like. But overall, fairly traditional control deck, outside of the fact that, of course, he has that 3 copies of Narset's Parter of Veils and Days Undoing. This is something he is a very big fan of across multiple formats and is going to support here today. Off to a 4-1 start are both of these players. And, as we can see, already pitching elementals, kind of the staple site of the fair decks in the format right now is these pitch elementals as your way to interact early in the game. But now both players kind of low on resources. As just a second land and pass back to George.
Yeah, for sure. Most formats are defined by your mana base. Modern has a Shock Fetch combo. Legacy has dual lands. Vintage has Mishra's Workshop. But now in Modern, not only is it defined by fetch into shocks and maybe some Surveil lands from MKM, but these pitch elementals let you cast so many spells in turn one. Like if you look here, the blue-white control player was down 3 cards before they even got to take a turn. That's wild. And they don't want to be down those cards, but hopefully with the One Ring and Nurse, like you mentioned, George will be able to get back some card advantage. And just as long as he's surviving, I imagine the blue-white deck is favored going the long game. So Joseph did have a great turn 1 with that grief, but nothing to follow it up on turn 2 is looking like.
Yeah, no turn 2 follow-up can be a really big deal. Something like a Dothy or whatever. Anything really, even just an in-step Bowmasters here would be a nice piece of pressure just to get something started. Is just going to be a Surveil, and like you called out this one, Raucous Theater. Last time we covered Modern here in the booth, we saw a ton of this exact look where we're talking about a Triome alongside a dual land, usually Surveil lands, and pitch elementals being the primary way for players to interact. That's still the case in Modern as we see it today. Now, of course, Modern Horizons 3 on the horizon. Maybe that could be changing, but for the time being, lot of that going on as here is
Purified, I guess, would be a Fable the Mirror Breaker.
Mirror Breaker. Okay, yeah. I was like, why is it off in exile? That's not exile. That's simply the checklist card getting put off to the side. Fable the Mirror Breaker going to very quickly resolve, make the Goblin Shaman it's known for. And this is a great card to get things going here against George Jabbour. Very well known for winning every Pro Tour it's been legal for is Fable of the Mirror Breaker and all the various abilities on it. You can read there on the screen right now.
You get a lot of value for 3 mana with Fable the Mirror Breaker, only costing 1 pip of mana red. So if you want to grind, if you want some grindy mid-range matchup, you can do no better for 3 mana than Fable the Mirror Breaker. Like in this matchup, it can pitch away these removal spells like, Fatal Push, not so great against the blue-white control player with 7 creatures, all which cost 4 or 5. So you can really get rid of these bad cards and the old adage of Jund is 55% against everything, but you have to draw the right cards at the right time. Fable just lets you get rid of those bad cards and get the good cards you're wanting.
Yeah, I like that you call out Jund there because this is very much the texture of what this matchup feels like. If you've been around for Modern for a long time, the Jund versus it was used to be Jeskai control was like the fixture, the texture of the fair Magic you could play in Modern. It became kind of a classic staple matchup where there was a lot of play. You had some ridiculous sideboard cards that dawned this, it's for the fair matchups, for these ridiculous card advantage cards. And really, we've moved away from that now. Jund kind of looks more like the Rakdos Scam deck that we see in Bernal's hands right now. And the control decks have moved to a more of an Azorius look, featuring Kahira, a little bit like what George Jabbour has. But the play patterns are still very similar. And the card advantage cards that would matter in that matchup back in the day matter today. And we're talking about Fable the Mirror Breaker here right now, as it is going to go ahead and make its first treasure is the Goblin Shaman, beaten down for 2 damage. Second chapter from Fable already resolved. It's clocking in, going to work, discarding these useless not dead after alls, and potentially a Bone Crusher Giant for Joseph Bernal. And the Thoughtseize is a good follow-up.
Yeah, Bone Crusher not too bad, but there are better hits you can do against the blue-eye deck, like the just cast Thoughtseize. So Bernal's looking at a Subtlety, that previously mentioned Supreme Verdict, and a Solitude. These are all pretty good cards. So, trading 1 mana for a piece of heat is really great, especially since Bernal does have the advantage. He has a 2/2 clocking in there. Soon he'll have a second 2. So does he want to get that Verdict or there's actually a hard choice there. I don't know what I would pick, and it looks like he doesn't either.
Yeah, it's interesting where George does not have a 5th land right now, right? So like Heartcast Solitude's the way to start getting the card advantage stuff going again. And Supreme Verdict's the card that face up George can cast. So if you want to get rid of that, that's the easy one. Subtlety doesn't get as much value as something like Verdict, I'd argue, because you can kill it with your otherwise useless removal spells if it's simply being flashed in to block a Goblin Shaman. And so like knowing about this Subtlety is going to be a huge piece of context for Joseph Bernal, who is going to cast Kolaghan's Command. It looks like discard, return, Bone Crusher Giant. Those are 2 pretty good motes. 2 for 1.
Yeah, the Bone Crusher isn't terrible. It's a creature that attacks, and with Joseph seeing the coast is basically clear with the Supreme Verdict, Thoughtseize out. He's you know what, nug your land because you want all the lands you want. Every card in the blue-eye deck is useful for them at this point in the game, and get back my threat. And just like next turn, he'll have 2 2/2s, and they'll play another 4/3, and that's like a 2-turn clock that George will have to scrape something together, or just die to like these mid-range beats that Joseph is presenting.
Yeah, and Fable really showing, I'd argue, really showing its worth here in this matchup as it went from being fairly even to this Fable. We mentioned Joe not having clock being a big deal. Fable on its own able to really start getting something going. And now with that Thoughtseize, he really has a lot of information as to what George is up to. And it's honestly right now not a whole lot. And with him discarding the land, he drew a land off the top, which you know about, I believe, from the Preordain. And so still at 4 lands, like he still has this option with Subtlety, right? To trade it for half a Bone Crusher Giant. But that doesn't feel good. But how long can you sit there and take damage from Goblin Shaman? So Bernal kind of has all the tools, all the resources, and all the knowledge at his disposal right now. The question is, can he get over the finish line before George can draw some cards to be able to start to catch up?
Yeah, George had the option to flash in that Subtlety as a vanilla or French vanilla 3/3 creature, which could block the Shaman token. That was like maybe okay, but then the Bone Crusher are going to come down, so you're dying to that thing. And I mean, George has an island and a plane symbol on his jacket, so I definitely defer to him when it comes to deciding what to do with the blue-white cards.
Yeah, certainly a measure of expertise is the patches. Looks sharp. George Jabbour, like I said, he's played quite a bit of this. Number 40 on our leaderboard right now. Kind of hasn't had like a really huge breakout finish like we saw from Dom Harvey at our last event, winning both events. But someone that has done a very good job making deep runs at multiple of our tournaments, is very commonly a fixture on our leaderboards and in our feature match areas. I would expect him to have quite a bit of knowledge here in this matchup, especially given how common it is. But I mean, Fable the Mirror Breaker is a tough one to slog through, and with the turn 1 grief, I mean, really setting the pace for this matchup and kind of George Jabbour's card like advantage, just card resources struggles, having to pitch that Solitude on 1, has really defined the entire texture of this game and given Bernal this window to resolve this Fable, which is now making short work of George Jabbour on both card advantage, mana, and damage.
Yeah, this Fable, this Goblin Shaman token, a very desirable card, even though it's just a token.
It's a token,
charging there for 2. The card that Dom Harvey won with his time deck was Roxanne Starfell Savant. George doesn't have a Roxanne, though he could cast her, but he does have a Solitude, the aforementioned one that everybody was aware of. We were aware of. Joseph Bernal was aware of it. I'm going to play this guy and try to take care of, I would imagine, the reflection of Kikijiki. Yep. And then Joe's like, you know what? I'm just going to make another Shaman token because I can. And here it is. And also, but no, wait. I have a second Kolaghan's Command to nab that 3/2 and also discard the Subtlety for 3 mana. Joseph got rid of 9 mana worth of cards on George's side, which is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, this second Kolaghan's Command, huge. This card, printed in Dragons of Tarkir, made a huge impact on Modern immediately upon being printed in exactly these style of matchups. Going to be one of Joseph Bernal's better cards, and he drew both of them that are in his main deck. And, being able to have that versatility, we saw Raise That on Bone Crusher Giant come up there. It was just shock your Solitude discard. I mean, that's a beating for George Jabbour. Was finally able to get the Solitude going to try to get some 2-for-1s, try to catch back up in this game. These Kolaghan's Commands are making that very difficult. But Joseph Bernal has a lot of mana to work with. We know he has a Bone Crusher Giant. Doesn't seem to have too much else right now. We'll see what he decides to do with all this mana. 3 treasures, 4 lands. That makes 7 mana, and I don't believe a land drop played yet this turn. As George seems maybe a little bit frustrated with the string of discard that has come out of the Rakdos Scam deck. Certainly the better half of his deck, Joseph Bernal has drawn here in game number 1. Part of the Power Fable as well, that second chapter. That discard 2, draw 2, I think is one of the most underrated abilities, certainly upon release. I think it's hard to ever qualify Fable as underrated now, but when you talk about, wow, you just draw the good cards, well, there's some work that was put in to make that happen.
Yeah, and like you said, Joseph Bernal is drawing all the good cards. He's not drawing his Fatal Pushes or his Terminates or Molten Collapses. He's drawing Creatures and Thoughtseizes and Colgan's Command, which is great. George did draw a Leyline Binding, which, you know what, is an interactable spell. That's fine. You can get my 4/3. It already stomped you for 2. You're at 8. You need some more heaters to try to put up a defense against this little Goblin Shaman that could.
And here comes the Kahira that was bought. So we now have a blocker for the Goblin Shaman. So it's not the prettiest, but we do have the pressure covered. And again, this is really where the control deck kind of has to be at this point. You've been on the back foot all game, been discarded. You've had to answer these 2-for-1 threats. You're really low on resources, and you're in this spot where you really just need to stop the pressure and give yourself time to find cards like your 4 copies of the One Ring, find your Narcets, find your own 2-for-1s. And Bernal, right now, he's doing exactly what he needs to be doing, which is get George dead. And here comes Angress Rampage to make exactly that happen. 2 more damage coming across. It is a 4-turn clock, about to be a 3-turn clock after this connect. And we will see if George can find an answer. Only a land in hand right now. Nothing left in the chamber that we can see. Going to be played, did not get cycled, is the Zargos Triumph, which is land number 6. And here's a Dash Ragavan. That's a good one, but Subtlety, a solid one to answer that.
Yeah, answers it for at least a turn. I imagine Bernal will put it on the bottom. Get out of here, Ragavan. We don't need you. Now there's a 3/3, and Joseph Bernal's Rakdos, scam deck does have a lot of removal, but you know what? George finally has said, you know what? Chill out. Block the road.
One ring?
To let me untap and draw the One Ring, which, Anger's Rampage can get rid of that. There are not many other ways for Joseph Bernal to get rid of this One Ring now that he's used his 1 copy of Anger's Rampage. He's kind of just hoping on stomp value here, maybe, to get through some damage, but, he will get a treasure no matter what. So now the game is completely flipped. Bernal was basically in command of the entire game with discard, but you know what you can't Thoughtseize? The top card of the opponent's library.
Oh, yeah, no kidding. What a sequence of draws we had here from George. Subtlety into the One Ring. He never did have it. Wasn't sweating. Great series of draws there. Obviously put Ragavan on bottom because Subtlety's able to check that one very easily. As here comes a draw with One Ring on end step, which I believe is finally going to draw out an Orcish Bowmasters. Now, I believe Protection is still up right now, so we can't ping George with it, but we can go ahead and grow the Orcish army with the extra draw that's going to happen here. And then that makes the One Ring much more mitigated on George's following turn, and is going to continue to do damage him with now at 6. Even just 1 counter on the One Ring can be a big deal, especially in the face of a Bowmasters.
Yeah, George is at 6, and so he's taking 1 from the burden counter of the ring. So he's getting kind of low. So he will need to bring some defenses up against Joseph Bernal, 2/2 and a 1/1 try, so 1 wants to try to get through. Orcish Bowmasters really great against the One Ring. Turns out, we all know this. But Joseph is trying to play around and add some counter spells in the blue-white deck. George Jabbour is running 4, as a blue-white player wants to do. So we'll see what George can assemble with all these cards in his hand and all this, 6 mana in play, maybe a 7th one, and see if he can survive with the One Ring play against these little dinky dudes that Bernal's presenting.
Well, I mean, Bowmaster is hard to call a dinky do when there's a One Ring in play. That one can grow very quick, especially its Orcish Army Companion. I mean, we're talking about top decks here from George. I mean, what a series of draws Bernal has had. I mean, when you talk about resolving the One Ring versus the Rakdos Scam deck, really, I think you kind of generally think lights out for the most part, unless you're just dead on board. The Bowmaster is really one of the only cards you have as recourse for that. That's why it's so powerful. We see it ubiquitous across both Modern and Legacy, the Eternal formats where it's legal for exactly this reason, answering the One Ring, brainstorms, anything like that. And yeah, with the Orcish Army now up to 4, George decides he has to draw some cards. There's no Supreme Verdicts left, I don't believe. I think he only had 2 in his.
He's got 1 more left in there in the tank.
Okay, we got 1. We need 1.
All right, so George did answer his One Ring with the 2nd ring, so at least he's not going to die. Not the best answer. 4 mana. Here we go. If you can draw a card, so he's got that answer. 2 mana left, 3 mana left, but that fetch lands do cost something. They cost you 1 or maybe 3 life, and George has exactly 3 life left with 7 power on the opposing side and only a mere 3/3 to block. So we'll see if George can get anything together. All these Days Undoing, counter spells, forced negation, all these reactive spells they're not going to affect the board, and that's not great when you're going down against these non-dinky orcish armies. That's now board, that's
no
a lot
longer
for
dinky. It has exited the dinky part of its life cycle as the orcs. Exactly what you said. George really looking to once again kind of under the gun to find an answer, and Teferi is actually a fine way to get things started. Bernal picks up, looks at his 2 lands in hand. Yeah, okay, neither of these lands answer that. Teferi is in, but it's got a lot of problems to solve. Do we just bounce the army? Do you just bounce the One Ring? What direction do you go? Do you just tick up?
Yeah, well, I would like to keep playing the game. So he has to remove one of the 3 creatures because otherwise they would crash in and kill George. So George is
we still protection, right? So we get One Ring protection for a turn.
That's true. That's super true. In fact,
but does it give you protection? Your Teferi doesn't get protection, so you're kind of incentivized to use the downtick now. So what's going away? Goblin Shaman. I mean, the token's the best, right? Because the bouncing Orcish does not feel good. So it's got to be one of the tokens, and we do pick the Goblin Shaman, and then that draws you a card with Sugar's Bowmasters, which is going to pick off the Teferi, and now we have a 5-power Orcish army in the Bowmasters. Protection for this turn has George Jabbour, so he's not dead on board despite looking like it. Get a good look at the very powerful 2-mana Orc Archer, a rare from the Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth set. Kind of had this one. There was no, you talk about underrated, overrated. People were on this one quick. They're like,
that one up. I'm just really disappointed. These are archers and they don't have reach. Really, just like not doing great for like
what are we doing?
Energy, like just unplayable except for every 4 minutes ever legal in every day.
Who designed this card?
Black meta, So these 2 lads are pretty good at sniping down Teferis, even with the One Ring on the opposing side.
Supreme Verdict number 3. Hello, right on time is the last copy of Supreme Verdict, and now the One Ring potentially able to start going to work. You do need to worry a little bit about a follow-up Bowmasters, but we might just be in the spot where we can't answer it. But we can check if we can with this Narset Part of Veils first. We find a copy of Counterspell. Nice full art copy there for George Jabbour. 2 lands in hand still for Bernal. Flooded out this late in the game. Does not have as much card advantage as George does. And it's Fable the Mirror Breaker's the draw off the top. Just what he needs to cash out these 2 lands. And you can see George, some top decks back and forth for both of these players.
That was perhaps one of the best answers. It is a little bit hampered by the Narset Part of Veils on George's side, but it still is a creature that can kill George, and he was able to sneak it in under that counterspell, which is now will be live until it is used for the rest of the game.
Absolutely. So now Days Undoing starts to look good if we can find it. We found Prismatic Ending instead.
Yeah, I've been in this position before where you get your blue-eyed opponent down to 2, and now you kind of have that look on your face where you're like, well, I don't have a lot of options anymore. I'm just going to keep playing the game because I can draw maybe a burn spell that sneaks in. Never give up, never surrender. But like, oh, it's a rough time. You get them to 2. Maybe they'll play a Shockland and play it on tap. But I don't think George Jabbour is going to do that based on his past experience playing blue-white in the Energy Series.
I mean, we have things like, well, now we don't have the Colorion's commands anymore, but you have some amount of direct damage with the things like Bone Crusher Giants and the like. Orcish Bowmasters kind of counts as well. And the One Ring now has a high enough cost with you being at 2 that it's not even really usable anymore. Like it's kind of more or less a blank piece of cardboard unless another copy of the One Ring starts to become into the question, which maybe that's what's happening here is I believe we are going to go ahead and draw a card. Would signal either a way to bounce it or another One Ring in hand. We have the Manamo to untap it, so we're going to draw 2 more cards. Ton of cards here for George. Needs to just not die. He does have another copy of the One Ring. Go ahead and clear the first one. That makes a lot of sense. I don't think you make that play unless you have another one to go ahead and clear it. Don't want to just die as we head back to Bernal. And now, I mean, really, Stomp is one of the only ways out. We can keep putting lethal threats in play with things like Reflection of Kiki Jiki, things that will just threaten to attack for lethal, but Subtlety does threaten to block those. Really needs a piece of direct damage, but he's been through a lot.
Yeah, there are not tons of outs in Bernal's deck left, but there's certainly non-zero amount. George has, I've got another Narset. Let me look for this Days Undoing. Just really have the wiped out KO. There's only 1 copy, but sometimes that's all you need to go with Narset.
I mean, you'll find it eventually. I think that's George Jabbour's motto here is you'll find it eventually, and then they'll slam the door of the game, and we can move along with things as this game is certainly slipping away from Joseph Bernal. It looks like players going back and forth. Wasn't really clear who's going to win. Now I think after the One Ring play, after the counter spell we found, these Narsets have been card advantage every single time. Get a look at the Narset Part of Veils there. I really think that this one's more or less slipped away. I think you only have another turn or two before it doesn't really matter what series of draw slips are. You could demonic 2 every turn. You're not going to have enough resources to get out, but we'll see. Exactly. But a little shake in the head. I don't think he's super thrilled with the way this game's going either.
Yeah.
Daunting Voidwalker played.
I think Bernal drew his second Bone Crusher Giant for his deck, which is lethal. So with this Voidwalker, if George counterspells, I think Bernal might get it. I didn't get the best look, but in my head, I'm hoping for the Bone Crusher because I want exciting magic.
Sure.
We're gonna see what happens here. Joseph curiously did not play the Daunting Voidwalker last turn. Maybe for this exact position where Voidwalker gets counterspelled and then he
counterspelled 1 mana up. Do we go
one
for
mana
it?
up.
He's thinking
about it. He's asking,
asking how many cards. One card, one ring. I think you were asking about protection now. Can you be targeted? And he cannot be targeted, so he has to wait till upkeep. So you would have to do it on tap anyway, right? Oh no, okay, it is cleared. So it's just right there, and I think we're doing this now. Yeah, on upkeep is just a missing reinforcing, and Joseph Bernal's gonna steal it. He drew the last Bone Crusher Giant.
He drew the other shock in his deck, the Stomp. Like normally,
Stomp is last out. Holy
Stomp
cow.
is great against the One Ring because it stops the protection, but you can't stomp them. But Joseph Bernal's like, you know what? I'm gonna play this 3/2. This vanilla 3/2 is lethal. You want to counterspell? I was like, well, it will kill me, and I have nothing else in my hand. So yes, I will.
Shadow.
Yeah, and then untap, upkeep, stomp, take 2, and that's the ball game. So that's a great example of why you should never give up, never surrender when playing against these blue-white decks. And then blue-white deck also, like his hand got picked apart. You saw him kind of being like, where's all my stuff? Like you keep playing Fable of the Mirror Breakers. That card's so good, but I'm gonna keep playing. And what a great example of just blue-white versus black-red in Modern in 2024. I love it.
Yeah, fair magic at its finest, and I think some of the magic that really inspires people to play the Modern format and why the Modern format gets so much love. But there's more magic to play, so let's take a quick look at George Jabbour's sideboard as he has managed to lose game number 1 to an incredible series of draws. And let's get a look at what he's going to have access to. So we have 3 copies of Stern Scolding, 2 copies of Dress Down, 2 Force of Negation, 2 Aether Gust, a copy of Kahira the Orphan Guard as a companion, 1 Rest in Peace, 1 Days Undoing, 1 Chalice of the Void, 1 March of Otherworldly Light, and 1 Narset Parter of Veils. What kind of adjustments are we looking to make here in game number 2?
So modern decks as a whole, generally, you're fair, you're unfair. What axis are you on? Are you trying to ignore what your opponent's doing and go down this really crazy like lots of artifacts or something, or are you just like playing really strong spells? And there's some synergy in here, or just like kind of open-ended good stuff. These are both basically good stuff decks with a slight combo flourish. So I wouldn't imagine a lot of changes will be done here. Like Stern Scolding, yeah, there's some griefs in there. That's not bad. Maybe you bring that in. You can't hit Fables with it. You can't hit Colgan Spam, but you can't hit Bone Crusher. But you can hit a lot of creature with that. So I probably would imagine bringing some 1 mana interaction spells because the way this blue-eyed deck can lose quickly is if Joseph Bernal is like grief. Never, not even dead, not even close, whatever all those cards are called, and cast it twice, and then you have a threat. You've got 2 other cards, so I would try to mitigate that a little bit. Maybe Force of Negation come back because that's very specifically only basically a Stable of the Mirror Breaker, and you're going to get Thoughtseize, so you can't have all these like very specific spells in your hand. So bring in a couple Stern Scoldings, maybe some Dress Downs for value. That's also good against the grief if you have time to cast it, and maybe shave a couple things in the deck. Like otherwise, I think this deck is fairly well set up to go against decks like this. That's why George built it to go against these kinds of decks.
Right, I think you are pretty well set up for those matchups, and so you may want some Stern Scoldings that hits a lot of the creatures or whatever. But we're talking about small interaction adjustments. We're not talking about an overhaul of the game plan, and it's fairly free to leave a Days Undoing in. I imagine his combo being so light should be easy to keep in. And now I think if we talk about Joseph Bernal's list, that may not be the case. He may be doing a little bit more overhauling. Let's see what he has to work with. So for Joseph Bernal, we have 4 copies of Nihil Spellbomb, 3 Blood Moon, 2 Pithing Needle, 2 Ingress Rampage, 2 Liliana of the Veil, 1 Magus of the Moon, and 1 other copy of Bone Crusher Giant to go with the 2 in the main deck. What do you like here against blue-white?
Yeah, so the easy thing, you've got 4 Fatal Push in your deck. Get on out of here. It can maybe kill a Subtlety if you're lucky, and if you're lucky, 3 different ways. So these removal spells, you can get them out here. Maybe you keep the Angress ranging because it answers the 1 ring. A Moon Collapse, probably you can kill it to Fairy, but like you're already, in the North you're already down a card if you're targeting those Planeswalkers. So you probably don't want any of these removal spells. All the creatures, great, keep them. So taking out these removal spells, you can bring in another Bone Crusher Giant. Another, if you want to hit the mana base, you can. Azorius Control is the name of George Jabbour's deck, but he does have a lot of non-basics in there. Like he's trying to play Prismatic Ending and Leyline Binding. Obviously, there are 3 islands and 2 planes, so that is a non-zero amount of basics. So, like, does Joseph want to try to get this Blood Moon game going? I would imagine no by default, but maybe like game 3, like if Joseph's still playing, he can board those in on the play and get them in. But for now, I kind of just Liliana's the Bone Crusher, maybe the Pithing Needles to just preemptively stop these Teferis, these Narcissistes, these One Rings. You can play them for 1 mana. You do kind of have to guess, or maybe you get some hints with Thoughtseize, with some tips and tricks you get from reading your magazine discard spell. But those will definitely show up your deck, and I like the sideboard games of Black-Red versus the sideboard games of
Absolutely. And players are already underway, doing some very quick shuffling and playing. Both these players very aware of the clock, going to play pretty quick. We see a copy of Not Dead, well, maybe Dead After All. Not Dead After All. It's going to be pitched to Grief, and that was going to be Stern Scolding. So George Jabbour was on the play here after losing game number 1, is going to hold up blue mana there on turn number 1 and actually be able to Stern Scolding the Grief pitch. That is a huge swing in George's favor, having access to that, as here comes a preordained for George's turn 2. Yeah, Stern Scolding there. Counter target creature spell with power or toughness 2 or less. So Grief being a 3/2, even evoked, can be countered. So a little 2-for-1 there immediately on turn 1. Preordained to follow up to help hit some land drops, I assume. Can't get a great look, as here is a Surveil land. Looks like the Hedge Maze, blue-green. Can't get a super good look at that one. But yeah, no, it's actually Meticulous Archive. Anyways, back over to Bernal we go, who does seem to have a turn 2 play with a very quick fetch of Verdant Catacombs. So this game already looking very different from game number 1, just from that play draw differential.
Yeah, being on the play, having your 1 mana spell to get a 2-for-1 for 1 mana is insanely good. That Grief was a fool of a took. And so now Joseph doesn't have a way to use that second Not Dead After All, because now it's kind of hitting his hand, and like maybe he can hit it on a Daunting Voidwalker, but like a lot of the removal spells in the blue-white deck, in fact, basically all of them exile the creature. So it's not even good outside of the evoke shenanigans. So that was not just a 2-for-1, it's a 2-for-1 plus. It turned maybe a card dead in Joseph's hand. Now Joseph does have, I think, at least 1 copy of Fabled Mirror Breaker in place, so he can get these cards away, rummage them, try to hit your discard spells. So that's not in the end of the world, but George does have the great play of Narset Part of Veils, but it can die to the Daunting Voidwalker. Do we get a look at what he revealed with that Narset?
He revealed a prismatic ending, so he does have an answer to the Daunting if it does not get attacked. I think that adds additional pressure to go ahead and clear the Narset. Also, I mean, life totals aren't really low enough that it would go anywhere else anyway. Yeah. So yeah, this attack makes a lot of sense. And yeah, considering solituding, is George interested in potentially getting? I mean, you get a card back, assuming you get to keep the Narset, right? That's attractive enough that maybe getting spending 2 cards for 1 to get this Daunting off the board is worth doing. We'll see exactly. I mean, he's really given this a lot of thought. But having just that turn 2 clock for Bernal is another difference here from game number 1, where it just matters a ton to be able to start pressuring these Planeswalkers with George on the play. And now he's having to spend 2 cards for 1 in order to just get it off the board. You know, if Joseph has something like Stomp, sure. Stomp can clear the card, so he doesn't get to actually recoup that card that he is theoretically protecting by solituding and keeping the Narset around. You'd get another card out of it. Not going to happen any longer, but no third land for Joseph Bernal means we're stumbling a little bit on more than one axis as we go back to George Jabbour. We'll see what his turn 4 can cook up. Can he press the advantage?
Well, Blue-White isn't really known for pressing advantages with that much agility. But George does have Narset in play, which turns off, Fable the Mirror Breaker 2nd chapter. Joseph Bernal did not hit his 3rd land drop, which is really unfortunate because I think you have all these 3 mana spells. You got the Bone Crusher. I think you have 3 Fable the Mirror Breakers in this hand.
3 Fable and a Kolaghan's Command, I believe.
So we
have all 3 mana spells.
With another Not Dead After All, which is also basically is a Dead After All card right now in the matchup. But George does have a Gyre Reach Sanitarium, which is great for him. Doing it on Joseph's turn does mean Joseph, it is not great with Narset the Part of Veils.
Yeah, basically he has to just discard while George gets to draw and discard. So actually just activating your land becoming card advantage is another great reason to keep Narset Part of Veils around. And it's another common fixture of the George Jabbour deck list where he tries to leverage Narset Part of Veils and all of her synergy. As Bernal does find a land finally here. We'll see if he can start to answer some of these problems. George having all his mana up, activating Gyre Reach Sanitarium, all that kind of stuff. Gonna be tough. You have a lot to work through, but now that you have 3 mana, you can at least start to do so. 2nd Swamp found, potentially indicative of some number of Blood Moons.
Yeah,
but
so now that Bernal has hit his 3rd land, we have now transitioned to the mid-game portion. We've dodged all those annoying beginnings. Am I going to get scanned? Like, do I get just a Narset Days I'm doing? You know what? We're surviving. We're going to keep playing Magic for another, few minutes at least. And so now we can have Joseph start deploying his strikes. He's got 3 Fables there, Mirror Breaker, and a Kolaghan's Command. So he's thinking, do I want a Fable? Maybe a Fable now and like a Kolaghan's Command, like an upkeep or something to kill the Narset, like before the 2nd chapter goes off. But it looks like he's just going to pass the turn back and keep that Kolaghan's Command up to try to get back that Grief. Because next turn, if he draws a land again, slamming Griefs for 4 mana against Blue-White is just wonderful, awesome. Like it feels so good.
Powerful.
And here comes the Kolaghan's command. You know, you're going to activate your Sanitarium. Let's just kill that Narset and get back the grief. So a little 2-for-1 on Bernal's in to stop this, weird Gaia Reach Narset combo that has, I'm sure, done George a lot of good work over the years.
Yeah, it does get to actually leverage the draw and discard because the activation is still on the stack. So it actually does get to potentially, discard one of these flood of 3-mana cards, assuming that is something he wants to do. And obviously grief in his hand, part of the equation here. And now you have to wonder too, is, we know about a prismatic ending. Are we going to reach for the grief scam here in the mid game, as you'll call it, with 3 mana now for Bernal? Is that something, we want to reach for now? I mean, I see the Not Dead After All still in his hand as he's considering discarding a Fable. And so, yeah, he does. It looks like he is planning to incorporate that as part of his plan to catch up. Because, I mean, it's high upside. If it works, I mean, you're really well off. If not, maybe you get to discard it to one of your Fables. So, pretty high upside and, maybe not that low of a downside too. I'm not that surprised to see that happen, but it does look weird from here, discarding Fable the Mirror Breaker to Gaia Reach Sanitarium when that's maybe one of your better cards in the matchup.
Yeah, if I was George and I saw that Joseph discard a Fable, I'm like, holy moly, what does he have in his hand then? He has a Grief. Does he have the Not Dead After All? Like, what else is horrifying? Is there a Blood Moon out there? Because look at all George's lands. They're all very pretty and lots of stuff going on, which means they tap for more than one color and they're non-basic. So this is a very delicious board for Blood Moon. We'll see. Maybe Joseph put it in. I'm not sure. We'll see. What goes on here. But George is going to draw for the turn and just pass it back as a blue-white player does.
Little draw go magic. You don't see that too much anymore in any formats.
Yeah, it's still good. Well, you got to cast your Sarah Angel in turn 5, but other than that,
right, sure, right. The mid game, if you will.
I will. Yep. So Joseph did draw a 4th land for that grief coming on, but you know what? Joseph's like, I'm just gonna play this 4/3. It's a threat. You can 1-to-1 answer it. That's fine. You'll take 2. Joseph's not under any pressure, so just get that out there and let's start seeing what you got.
So there actually is a lot to latch onto here when you talk about playing against the control decks. They're kind of viewed as a bane to a lot of new players. They don't like playing against control for a host of reasons. That's because you do have to play Magic very differently than I would say traditional Magic. Attacking, blocking, all that kind of stuff. And playing Bonecrusher Giant there over the myriad of fantastic other plays Bernal had is, like I said, very indicative of, if George isn't playing anything, he's not using his mana, I'm just going to deploy my worst threat that he has to answer. And that is what we did with Bonecrusher Giant, which got Leyline Binding. And now you can start to use some of your higher value stuff, like the Hardcast Grief, which got answered by another copy of Stern Scolding. Second one this game, Gaia Reach Sanitarium going to work now, actually helping both players. We're just using it for the face-up mode. No Narset shenanigans here as both players discard a fetch land and back to George we go. But like I said, the sequencing your threats is a big part of adapting to the playstyle of control, and it's really tempting to start slamming. Now you have your mana and all that stuff, slam your great stuff. Here, choosing to play Bonecrusher Giant and then lead on that in your string of threats, I think is really indicative of some heads-up play in the face of a control deck.
Yeah, George has been answering all of Bernal's threats with 1-mana spells, Leyline Binding, Stern Scolding, but George is ending every game, every turn ends with George having 3-4 mana open that he's not able to convert into a 1-ring or a Narset activation or some way to recoup this card advantage. So Joseph's like, you're one for winning my answers, but I got more threats where that came from. So that's perfectly fine. It feels kind of rough because you're not winning, but you're also not losing. So now Joseph did draw another grief. So George probably needs to answer this with another counterspell of some variety, a Stern Scolding, a counterspell, what have you. Or it will be a 2-for-1, which is, the name of the game when it comes to these grindy, mid-range, mostly fair answers. We have March.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's going to be. Yeah, March of Otherworldly Light with the trigger on the stack. So that's going to show the prismatic ending we've known about this entire time and a supreme verdict. We see Bernal reaching for the prismatic ending. We know that he has another copy of Not Dead After All in hand. So the verdict could actually potentially be very bad as this game goes to infinity and he draws another threat. He can just Not Dead After All. And that's basically his own 1-mana counter to supreme verdict for at least one of your threats. Now, we saw George do a very good job in this spot in the game last game, having a string of top decks of things like the 1-ring subtleties and things of that ilk. And we're getting to the point where it's time for that as well. And to help enable that, maybe we're reaching for a copy of a Surveil land here. I think we have another copy of Meticulous Archive in the 75. Getting a quick look.
Yeah, there are 2. As I think all these decks play 2 because turn 1 half the time is going to be fetch land, your Surveil land, and then you want another one.
Sure.
You're like, we're in the mid game. Just Bernal did play his 5th land, which is a big game when you've got Fables in your hand. Your opponent has a Sanitarium popping off. So but 5 lands does let you grief, maybe some other kind of action. I'm not sure. So, yep.
Leave on
Surveil.
top, says
Leave on
George
top.
Jabbour on his Surveil.
That's
I can't be
horrifying.
happy to see that in your Bernal.
Yeah, we hate that. We hate that. Like when they Surveil on top. It's like,
Yeah,
no,
we hate that.
they kept it. Like they're just dead now. So like, but when you Surveil on the graveyard, you're like, oh, what a great Surveil, what a great card. So Joseph is going to crack that March Flats and imagine play one of his Fable the Mirror Breakers he has in his hand.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of at the spot of the game where it's time to start reaching for those. Another swamp. I mean, I don't know. If you're George, I feel like you have to start to smell Blood Moon. I mean, there's a lot of swamps where you don't necessarily need all swamps. And it's Blood Moon
There it
right
is.
there, right now. George very quickly reaching for mana.
Please
I have
hold.
a response.
Yep, there's
Blood Moon resolves. We floated mana, which to me reads like we have an instant speed answer, like Leyline Binding.
Leyline Binding. Something. We're it's time to attack.
We're just gonna try to kill you. That's my answer to Blood Moon. Says George Jabbour, as now none of his lands make any color other than red, and Subtlety is gonna clock in, start going to work. 7 turns of work to do, as Kahira has been bought. That can help cast pitch cards if that becomes part of the equation. And here comes an Orcish Bowmasters.
So now that George could cast 2 ball lightnings in his main phase with his mana available to him, but not any of the cards in his deck besides the One Ring, trying to find these plains or islands. George is like, well, I know how this Blood Moon card works. I'm going to have to race, which isn't where you want to be against the Black Red. It turns out cards that are black and red like attacking more than cards that are blue or white in general. So Joseph did answer with an Orcish Bowmaster of his own to attack in. And now, if I was Bernal, which I've known Bernal for a very long time, I'd be sitting in a pretty happy spot right now with all the blue-white decks attacking me, and I've got Fables and Bowmasters with my Blood Moons. Boy, oh boy, do I feel beautiful. There's a lot of bees.
Yeah, you mentioned the control deck's not really known for pushing advantage with agility. We have no agility typically with your control decks to end games, and Subtlety is maybe one of the better ways. And already we're outpacing that with the Fable the Mirror Breaker plus Orcish Bowmasters combination that we've assembled. And I really have to wonder. I mean, we saw Bernal aggressively fetching these swamps early in the game. George Jabbour had plenty of fetch lands over the course of this game. Has 5 basics in his deck. Were we supposed to sequence our mana differently? I mean, obviously we've been using all our lands, right? We've had multiple surveils that have mattered off our meticulous archives. We've activated Gyre Sanitarium a ton. Like, we've gotten utility out of our lands. So the answer isn't necessarily clear to me, but I think, as you mentioned in the sideboarding, there's merit to bringing Blood Moon in this matchup. What is the traditional blue-white plan for it? Because now we have a lot of work to do. We have to draw basics, and then we have to remove Blood Moon before our cards even work. And now our Subtlety's on defense, and this game looks pretty hopeless from where I'm sitting if you're a George Jabbour fan.
Yeah, anytime you're playing a deck that adds more than 2 colors of mana to your mana pool, which is most decks in Modern, you have to be the Blood Moon tango. Like, is my opponent bringing in their Blood Moons? Do they even have Blood Moons? Like, usually these decks play 2 maybe Blood Moons, maybe 1 Magus. Bernal's got 3 Blood Moons, 1 Magus the Moon. He is ready to fight, maybe Tron or these other decks up. Or, all these decks that are trying to be, you may call yourself Azorius Control, but you really are playing, the Leyline Binding kind of nonsense 5 colors. Bernal's like, I've got just what you need, or just what I need for this matchup in the Blood Moons. So Bernal did bring in the Blood Moons. They're doing tons of work. They might have already just solidified George Jabbour's fate by just boarding them in and George not playing around it. Maybe it was correct to play around. Maybe you have all these ley lines and these things in your hand. Well,
it is hard. It's hard. It costs a lot.
But,
George Jabbour sees the writing on the wall. 2 Fables backed up. Blood Moon on itself doesn't win the game. Backed up by Orcish Bowmasters and 2 Fables. That wins the game. And George Jabbour willing to extend his hand, felled in, I would say, a less competitive fashion. There was a lot of good back and forth there with the stern scoldings. Joseph Bernal missing land drops and all that stuff, but the texture they handicapped, a ton of 2-for-1s, a ton of 3-mana cards that he knew were impactful in the matchup, and he also knew he had time. As you mentioned, control deck, not great at pushing advantage, and had the time, was able to draw out of it and slam the door on the game with cards like Blood Moon and Fable.
That's just the power of Blood Moon. It's been a fixture since Modern was invented, since pre-Modern. Blood Moon has always been a thread, and we're seeing exactly here now why. With all these decks playing lots of colors, Blood Moon's gotten even better because it goes against control decks. Traditionally, Blood Moon isn't good against 2-color control decks. They run all these basics and fetch ones and basics, but with Modern nowadays, Blood Moon just still roars its ugly head and is like, time to turn your lands into mountains. Have fun.
Yeah, while we're getting Bernal, we're going to have an interview with him here in a second. I do want to speak on that a little bit. I mean, the entire time I played Modern, and I played quite a bit of Modern, Blood Moon is actually I probably won more matches, won more money with Blood Moon than the average player. I actually played so much Modern in the SCG Tour and the Energy Series and all those kinds of things over the years. I was actually really disappointed when Boseiju, Who Endures, was printed, because now we have this, like, in your mana base, everybody main decks it answer to Blood Moon. And really, I mean, decks like Amulet Type now have so much extra coverage for it in the Modern format. It's not the same, I'd argue, oppressive fixture it was. People were previously main decking it. That was part of your plan. You had decks like Blue Moon that were centered around Blood Moon, but the card is just so powerful that, we see 3 copies of Blood Moon, a copy of Magus of the Moon in Bernal's sideboard here today. It's still a fixture of Modern, even though it's a lot more mitigated. I'd argue healthier for the Modern format, but I'd tell you what, I hate to see it. As an Izzet Mage, I want these greedy mana bases, just die. Just die to the Blood Moon.
As an Izzet Mage myself, I love to see it. And I played a lot of Blue Moon when Modern came out. I played Splinter Twin until I no longer could. Then I played Blood Moon until I no longer could play that deck. But Blood Moon just says, you're trying to be all fancy. I think that's a card with the flavor text. I'm going to call it Impatience or something. I'm going to count to 3. 3. And 3 mana value, once you have that Blood Moon in play, the game could just be over right there. And that's just like the power of like Blood Moon. It's like amazing.
Yeah, it's absurd. I always said it's the prison piece for the good guys. Stops all the crazy mana stuff with Tron and Amulet and all the like. And in this case, stops these greedy Triome mana bases. Like I said, there really was, and to go back to that game number 2, I'm going to talk to Bernal about it a little bit when it comes to sideboarding strategy. Didn't really get a chance to talk about it, but when you talk about boarding against control, you're not playing as Amulet where you're like, okay, I want all 4 Blood Moons. I want my Magus. I want 3 Blood Moons. I need to draw this and slam it on 3. I think you have the option too to just bring in like 1 or 2. A couple, like sometimes it's going to be good, sometimes it's not. When it's bad, maybe you can discard it to your fables or whatever. Yeah. You don't want to be flooded on it, but 1 or 2 can be really good. And as we saw in game number 2, it was really good because it puts George Jabbour in this under the gun of, do you want your cards to be cheap and effective, things like Leyline Binding and stuff like that? Do you want to get value off your meticulous archives and all that stuff, or do you want to instead spend your time playing around Blood Moon, which may not even be in my deck? Like, that's a very high cost. And just having only 1 or 2 copies in your deck can really force the issue without diluting your deck too much. So that's something I'm interested in talking to Bernal about as he does get situated. And is something that's kind of been a question about Modern as it's, as long as it's been a format. We talked about the Jund matchup, the versus Control back in the day. This is kind of the evolution of that. And we've seen stuff like this come up before where sometimes previously it was Fulminator Mage or whatever, but like attacking the control deck's mana base is actually a viable strategy for these mid-range decks in order to really force the control decks to stumble. And here we can do it with Blood Moon now that we're 2-color deck in the form of Rakdos Scam. And Bernal looks to be set up, someone that is no stranger to the interview booth. How's it going, Justin Bernal? Congratulations.
Congrats. Yeah, nice work. Casting Blood Moon is very skillful.
David McDarby, I see you.
That's me. My name right there. Yeah, that was. So tell me, how are you feeling after dismantling George Jabbour, who's not unknown to the NRG series in his blue-white deck, with just like Fables and Blood Moons? Like, is that exactly like how we drew it up?
Yeah, I mean it's scam, and I scammed, right? So that I don't know.
You sure did. Yeah. I think a lot of people would call Blood Mooning scamming for sure.
Blood Moon is the biggest scam. Like, there's
correct. So I want to talk a little bit about that and the matchup in general. So you showed up with Rakdos Scam, and I think your sideboard with like 4 Nihil Spell Bombs, like 4 copies of Blood Moon. You're very, very surgical in the decks that I think you're prepared for this weekend. There's a lot of control here on the NRG series. How do you feel about your matchup, given that your deck configuration? I mean, you put on a show there.
I mean, their deck is just a bunch of Disruption and One Rings and Narsets, right? Their win conditions are like super anemic. It's like elementals and stuff like that. So you're just like, obviously if they get going and they counter the right stuff, like, yeah, but like you put them under the gun immediately. Like, your Regiman is worth like 3 of their cards.
Yeah.
I mean, if you scam them, it's obviously you can say that about anything, but okay, the games you don't scam them, like you're just gonna like put them under the gun every single threat that you play, and you're playing a Thoughtseize deck. So hopefully you can disrupt their curve, get in a like their disruption curve, or like get rid of the ring and just run them out of resources, and then just land a threat, get them low life total, and then like finish them off with like a burn spell, a Ragavan, dash, something like that. Just like hard casting Grief is just like absurd in that matchup. You just saying,
actually good. Yeah, you have time for it.
Yeah,
let's
good.
Go.
Yeah, 3-2 Menace, like Thoughtseize you. Let's do it, right? And if you don't have counter spells, I'm just gonna pick the right removal spells out of your hand, and then hopefully like in that game, just he was trying to surveil a bunch and fix his draws, and his entire mana base was just non-basics. So we played this long game where eventually I'm gonna draw a Blood Moon, and hopefully you don't draw your 1 or 2 basic planes. He had a white fetch at some point, and I thought he was just going to fetch a planes preemptively, but he opted to surveil to try and get ahead, get a ring or whatever, which that's fine, but the deck is likely going to have some number of Blood Moons post board. I mean, especially I think he showed me 3 or 4 surveil lands in game 1. So like his mana base I think he showed me 2 or 3. I mean, so his mana base has like 5 comes into play tap lands and like Leyline Binding. Like he's gonna like fetch it. He's gonna fetch his mana base to make that card function. So I just don't. I don't know. Like Blood Moon seems great in that matchup. I don't know. Like just another threat that puts them under their gun, and you can do it as easily as or as early as turn 2 with Ragavan. So
with the monkey.
Yeah.
Yeah, you came fully prepared with Blood Moon. You have 3 Blood Moons and 1 Magus of the Moon. Maybe in the future you'll have the full play set of Blood Moon. But it did good work for you here, so yeah. What other like decks are you trying to like dodge with this scam deck? Because traditionally scam decks are good against like blue-white with your sideboard. But like, what are you trying to avoid here in Modern so far?
I really don't know. I have not really played the format much. I picked up. I heard there was a deck called Scam, so I was like, okay, this is sweet. I'm going to play that deck. And I played this week and was like, oh, man, this deck, it doesn't goldfish well because your cards are like, I don't know, like.
Do you grief yourself when you're doing your
right,
goldfish?
Yeah.
What are we doing here?
But I played a little bit on Moto, and I was like, ooh, yeah, these cards line up really well with the format. Like, pretty sweet. Bowmaster is a interesting Magic card. This deck is actually full of interesting Magic cards. So, and they all combine into, the deck's name.
This deck was interesting enough to pull you away from Stoneforge Mystics, so it's got that going for it.
Oh, I tried my hardest to play a Thopter Foundry deck. In this tournament, I really wanted to play Thopter Foundry with the One Ring and like Academy Runes and like Loop the Ring and stuff. I was like, oh, this is
he's
great.
Cooking now.
Yeah, but I was like, oh, I'm gonna draw with this for sure, or I'll just go 2 or 3. Like best case scenario is a draw. So I don't know.
I love your description of the deck. It's full of interesting Magic cards. I think for as long as Scam's been a fixture, had cards banned from it, you're really showing your stripes as someone that you said, self-acclaimed, not have played a lot of Modern. I would argue plenty of people no longer find these cards to be that interesting, and I think move toward more oppressive. And certainly, I think it's one of the best decks in the format. And with you, a 5-1 start, a great start to this tournament as we begin to close out the Swiss rounds. You got to be feeling really good about your selection over any Stoneforge Mystic shenanigans.
Yeah, I can't believe this deck had Fury at one point.
Fury,
that was
you and everyone else.
But yeah,
what were they thinking?
It's sweet. Yeah, it's definitely sweet. Any other questions?
All right, Bernal. Thank you so much for talking to us. I believe that was the end of round number 6 for you. I don't know if we have a backup dialed up, but thank you very much for talking with us, and I wish you luck in your final rounds of the tournament. Hopefully we'll see you in your scam deck full of interesting cards again in the top 8. A little bit more work to do. Good luck.
Congrats.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to get a quick update here from the back. All right. No, looks like, that didn't take long enough that we do not have time to run our backup match. So we're going to talk through a little bit of information about our series, what the players are playing for here today, all that stuff. We're going to go to break, and then we will be bringing you round number 7 of Modern here momentarily. Before we do that, let's talk a little bit about what these players are playing for here today. So what's really interesting about this weekend is it is a double showdown weekend, including a team event. So the Energy Championship, which now has 4 total qualified players after last weekend, will have 8 after this weekend, as well as the prizes you're playing for here in the Modern Showdown. So we're starting here, a 10K Modern Showdown. First place gets $2,400, a invite to the Regional Championship, and an invite to the NRG Championship, as well as 30 points on the leaderboard. So to the victor go all the spoils here on the NRG series. Second place does still get an invite to the RC. You can see that there with that little nice DreamHack insignia there, as well as $1,200 and a small drop off in points at 25. And then from there, it's just boatloads of money and points for the players, 820 for third and fourth, and then 415 all the way down. And obviously you get a point even just for playing the event. So you get points just for showing up. If you want to compete on the leaderboard, you do have to show up to the events, but obviously a lot of advantage by winning the event. As we saw again, Dom Harvey won both events and now first on our leaderboard after that weekend. So
60 points in one weekend is nothing to snuff at. That is insane, honestly.
Well, that's not all. If you win a showdown, you also get your own custom token made by Inklin Customs. She does an awesome job. Been a huge fan of her work for years now. She's been in this community, and she makes awesome tokens for all the winners of the showdown. So, of course, Dom Harvey will have his own coming, and as will the winner of this event. Now, It's too late if you're not signed up for this event, if you're watching at home, to get your token, but the team event happening tomorrow will have the same. You can see the team event token there, the Goblin Shaman with Connor Malele, Theo Jung, and Max Komanowski from 2022. Showdown winners, you get your own team token. So that is a nice little extra sugar on top for winning one of our events. You get quite a bit.
And if you've never played in a team tournament before, I think they are some of the most fun you can ever have with Magic the Gathering in a tournament. It's just so different, and you're just part of a team, part of something greater. It's like you're playing a team sport, but it's Magic the Gathering, so it's the best game ever made. And this Goblin Shaman token just won the last game. So if you come here and win, you can get your own token and play that. And when you slap down a token that has your face on it, like that's just the next level. That's the ultimate flex. It's awesome. Come out here.
Well, if you can't make it out to Indy this weekend, you still got one more shot here in season 1, as there is going to be an event in June. You can see June 22nd, 23rd in St. Louis. There will be a 10K Pioneer Showdown. So if you're not Modern's not your thing, you don't really want to be playing Modern, you got a opportunity to get all of the spoils I just went over that we have available for this event, and in the last event of season 1 in St. Louis. So you got that 10K Pioneer Showdown. And then if you still just want to play Modern super bad, there is a trial on Sunday. Get all your points if you're battling on the leaderboard, or just an opportunity to play some high stakes Modern. We have that available for you nearly every single weekend here on the NRG series. So with all that out the way, we got plenty more Magic here to play today, as well as plenty of Magic for you to play in the future. And we'll be bringing all that to you here very shortly. I'm Drake Sasser here in the booth with David McDarby, and don't go anywhere.